Okay, we return. Thanks for joining with us this morning. We're into our second segment of 4, and we're going to touch on a topic that is kind of, it tears people in two directions generally. And I say that because it's been my experience that most people, for the most part, you know, look at people who have the tag or the label of felon on them in a way that maybe isn't 100% accurate, but still is what it is. And I'm never at a loss to understand how, in one case, I can hear people say to me, you know, there's no justice in this country. The Department of Justice or law enforcement is abusive of our rights and so forth and so on, and then turn around and say, but everyone who's a felon must have been guilty. Wow. Really? So you mean these same people that you say are guilty of brutality or abuse or abuse of their power and authority, when it comes to whom they've chose to make a felon, suddenly they have 100% credibility? Now, most of you know that I am a felon. And if you don't, I'm here to tell you that I am, in full disclosure. And I've long fought against this prohibition on voting, against the prohibition on a number of things, not the least of which is your right to defend yourself, your right to be able to vote, your right to be able to run for office, and your ability to function in a society that, for all intents and purposes, has turned you into a pariah. Why do I say that? Well, in most cases, whether you've, you know, served your time and paid your debt to society and all that or not, there are 11 states that prohibit you from ever voting again. Even after you're no longer on probation, you have no more contact with law enforcement. And I personally find that to be completely unacceptable. Why? Because we fought a war over this thing called taxation without representation. So let's just take that one right off the table. If you're going to tell me that after a person has served their time, they don't have the right to vote again, we've got a major problem with that. And I don't care what color they are. Now, Eric here, of course, he's pitching that it has to be based upon, you know, that this is a limitation based on your color and all of that. That's hype. The truth is, Eric is looking for a bunch of new voters. There are approximately 6 million felons in the United States, but actually only 11 of them, only in 11 states, are they prohibited from voting. So recognize that what Holder is doing here is he's throwing out a chimera. It's a false option. And the truth is that in most cases, you know, the vast majority of people can vote again. Now, the truth is that Holder's real motivation here is not necessarily in being fair and equitable to anyone who's a felon. He's only, and I can prove that. The truth is, if he was trying to be fair and equitable and do the right thing by people, then he would say, and in addition to that, all of your other civil rights are returned to you. Employers cannot discriminate against you because you have a felony. You can go back into society and own a firearm. You have your civil rights back. But he doesn't say any of that. What about running for office? Oh, wait a second. Eric doesn't want us to have that, does he? Why? Because now, there are a number of states, my own included, I might add, in which you cannot run for any elected state office. So, makes no difference whether it's dog catcher or the governor, there is no elected office that you can serve or run for in the state of Missouri. Now, there is one application which you are permanently prohibited from, irrespective of anything else, and that's running for sheriff. And the reason for that, of course, is not that because you are a felon, but because you can't own a firearm. and you can't have one in your possession. And of course, as the sheriff, that would be the logical disqualifier. But the truth is that there's nothing prohibiting us from running for federal office. I could run to be a representative in Washington of the state that I live in. I could run to be the senator from Missouri, because there is no prohibition in the Constitution, only state laws. Now, there are many jobs which you're prohibited from as a felon. Among them, you can't be a public school teacher. But you see, it even goes beyond that. I'm going to give you an example. Many of us, over time, as our children were growing up, we were asked to serve as a chaperone at an event, such as a school class trip where the kids are going to the zoo up in another city, and they ask for parents to assist and take a team of 4 or 5 kids and make sure that nobody gets eaten by a tiger or falls over the edge of the bridge. I can't do that. Why is that? Well, because nowadays you have to go through a background check in order to be a chaperone. Furthermore, I'm prohibited from running the concession stand at my local high school football game for the very self-same reason. Now, with all due respect, if you've listened to this show more than once or twice, you probably have a fairly good idea of who I am. And I would say that there are a lot of people out there who are not felons that would be a better or greater risk to misuse or abuse either the authority of working behind the counter and counting money for sodas and popcorn, or abusing a child while chaperoning at a local event. I mean, the ridiculousness of it is that felons are, for the most part, stripped of all of their human rights as well as their civil rights. To prohibit me, as an example, from being able to go and spend time with my child during an event that most parents would look forward to with some interest is not necessarily, I mean, it's not like it's the end of the world, but it's inexcusable. To say that I could not be a teacher in a public school when I would consider myself a fair educator is inexcusable. And to be perfectly candid, I was convicted of an IRS crime, Title 26, Federal Code, not child molestation or anything to do with children. It was actually related to a firearm, and they used IRS code because we have this pesky thing that they hate called the Second Amendment. So how is it that someone who has a felony for marijuana when they were 19 years old and they're now 50 is prohibited from being a public school teacher when you've got university professors that openly declare and proclaim they smoke pot and encourage others, including their students, to do so? In fact, to be perfectly candid, we have a president who not only acknowledges that he did it, but that he did it to excess, and that he considers it to be on a par with alcohol. Now, I don't care what you think about marijuana, just the fact that the president says that when significant numbers of the 6 million felons, or 6.8, or whatever the heck the total number is of felons in the country, are based upon marijuana. Well, it's all due to changing mores, you may say. I disagree. You see, there are very, 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 very rare instances where someone should be prohibited from having access to a certain type of function or job based on their criminal history. But to be honest with you, I don't see a reason to prohibit someone from voting, running for office. I mean, I've gone to a state legislator at one point in time, in fact, 2 of them, and said to them, I'd like you to submit a bill that repeals the prohibition on my running for office, or any felon for that matter. And both times I was told by that particular representative, I'm not sure how I feel about that. And my response to them was, well, with all due respect, how you feel is immaterial. It's not your job, nor your place, quite frankly, to determine what the electorate has the right to do. No one would believe for a moment that if a person like me or a person like you, if you've got a felony, were to run for office, that your opponent wouldn't bring that out to the public. In fact, they would use that and they'd wear that thing to death in an effort to discredit you. But if the electorate actually said, it doesn't matter because I know that person, he's a member of my community, I've watched him in business, I've dealt with him, I've watched his children grow up, he's my neighbor or my friend, or he's someone I know from my church, or he's someone I've been in business with, or he's someone that I work with. And I'm confident that whatever transgression he had was in his past and that I can trust or believe in that person's authenticity and intent, then who is some elected representative to say that person doesn't have the right to make that choice? If there's only one thing that exposes elitism and statism for what it is, that would be it. The typical politician that says, I know best what's good for you, and I'll make those determinations on your behalf, with or without your approval. Now, most folks don't even realize that these prohibitions exist, because for some reason, felons are the modern-day equivalent of lepers. No one wants to be associated with them. The topic is almost never brought up in public or mixed company because it immediately casts a stain over that individual. But the truth of the matter is, our justice system is about as far from justice as one could imagine. I have seen more injustice from those who portray themselves to be the just than I have from the unjust. The truth is, it's really not anyone's place to determine who can and who cannot run for an office. Furthermore, there are other limitations on felons, including the limitation on whether or not they can get federal assistance or even state assistance if they're in trouble. I mean, if you're going to try and tell me that because someone's a felon and 20 or 30 years have gone by, and that person runs into some trouble and needs a little helping hand for a short term, we're not talking about a welfare career here, then you're going to try and tell me that that person's not entitled to food stamps, as an example, for a short period of time while their family is going through a window of unemployment? How ridiculous is that? Talk about creating a caste of second-class citizens. How about barring people from living in government housing because they have a felony? Really? Yes, they do. Try getting yourself a HUD apartment, housing and urban development, with a felony. See how far you get. You're not entitled to, in most cases, work for the government because the government says you're persona non grata. And if one were to think about the first place for government to make a change, especially in public opinion, it would be to allow people to work for government. You know, I hear in the news media, perfect example, when they were talking about Obamacare, putting it out there that navigators might be felons. And while I understand that if someone has been convicted once or multiple times of personal identity fraud or credit card fraud or something of the like, you may have some concerns about that, much like you would be concerned about having someone who's an accountant working now behind the counter in a bank. So, I mean, if you've been an accountant and you've been convicted of embezzlement, you know, it may not be a good idea to put you into the banker role in the Monopoly game again, right? But at the same point in time, government is the one area where, quite frankly, felons should get the first crack at a fair shake. And yet, it's the last. You see, the problem with Eric Holder and the Department of Justice, or the Department of Injustice, as I like to refer to them, is that their real issue here is not trying to do the right thing. Their real issue here is, how can I make political points before November and hurry it up? Or in this case, how can I get some new voters before November and make political points? The truth is, if you look at what our founders had to say about those things, they said that in fairly clear and uncompromising language, that once a person had served their duty to society, they were free to return back to the society from which they'd come. In fact, until 1968, when you left jail, your gun was given back to you, the same one that you were arrested with. Now, the argument, of course, is that, well, these people will go right back out and commit crime again. The truth is, by limiting their opportunities within society, you actually create the recidivism you're trying to prevent. Think about it. Someone gets out of prison, whether it's for a week or a decade or a life sentence, and you now prohibit them from voting, they can't get housing, they cannot get a job, they are prohibited from participating with their own family, they're barred and prohibited from being able to defend and protect themselves. And then you wonder why they go back to a life of crime, or turn to a life of crime, maybe permanently. So before you throw the baby out with the bathwater, I would strongly encourage everyone to look through all the issues before you make a decision. The snap, knee-jerk judgment of, well, if you're a felon, you don't deserve anything, is probably not appropriate, especially for the vast majority of people who are felons. Why do I say that? Well, let's recognize that the crimes that many, many, many people have been charged and convicted of that created their felony in the first place, for the most part, were not crimes where someone was injured or some property was damaged or stolen or what have you. There certainly are violent criminals, and of course, no one's suggesting here that no one should be penalized for a violent crime. And if you have been violent, then perhaps we need to cast a special review over that person. But even those people should have a legitimate, realistic way to go back and have their rights restored at some time in the future. You may disagree with that, and that's okay. That's the beauty of a republic versus a dictatorship. But when you have shill programs out there, perfect example. Technically, every felon has a right to get their firearms rights back. Did you know that? You didn't. Okay, so let me tell you how it works. If you're a felon, let's use the example that you're that guy earlier I mentioned who's 20 years old. You got arrested for a bag of marijuana. Here you are, 3 decades later. You're 50, you're 55, maybe 60, and you want to get your rights back to vote. It's an important election coming up. But you can't. So you apply to have your gun rights, as an example, restored, or you go back to a court. Well, the truth of the matter is that on a court level, it's going to cost you an enormous amount of money, and 9 times out of 10, it takes you years to get through the system. But in addition to that, try to go back and get your self-defense rights reinstated, and let me tell you how that works. According to the law, the ATF is required by law to do an investigation on your background so that they can either clear you or, pass a report on to the court so that they can say, okay, we adjudicate this guy to be, an upstanding member of society. His crime was 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, and he's had no trouble since then except two traffic parking tickets, and we're going to move on. Guess what? The law exists, but Congress has not funded it for 20 years, willingly and intentionally, because they know that while the law can't be repealed because that would raise the ire of people, they just don't fund it. Well, if that's the case, why won't they stop Obama the same way? Why won't they stop writing blank checks? The truth is, our society likes a double standard. And so my question for you is, are you guilty of participating in that? Before you make a snap judgment, give yourself an opportunity to evaluate all the information out there and not just jump on preconceived notions that have been fed to you by a ministry of propaganda media and a group of people who are or have a vested interest in helping you make up your mind. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to talk a little bit about extortion and why that is just another word for treason. I think you'll find that topic fairly interesting. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'd love to hear your comments and your feedback specifically on this topic. You can send me an email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. You can also catch this particular episode on YouTube. You can share it with friends. You can play an audio file of it if you'd like, or a video file, whichever is your preference. But I'd like you to open up that conversation with your family and your friends and your personal circle of influence. Let's make sure that we're not in the position of doing that which we know or should at least take a serious look at before we make a snap decision. We'll be back in just a moment. Before our